Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, as more time passes since the launch of early access for Path of Exile 2, players are getting further into the game and further into the actual mechanics that are currently available. As I have continued my own journey, I've continued to learn new things myself, find out stuff that wasn't obvious at first, and of course I've made mistakes that I would later learn were avoidable. So today we're going to break down another list of tips and tricks for Path of Exile 2 with a focus on the endgame and approaching it as someone who's not played Path of Exile 1's endgame for a long time. And we have more early game applicable tips videos already existing if you want to check those out too. That said, first up today, more and more people are realizing this, but it's still a far too small portion of the player base. You can pause the game. Press escape or start on a controller. Notice how it says paused. Well, in solo play, this is simply how the game works, and it also works if you open your skill tree or open the world map or the atlas tree. Anything that takes over your full screen also pauses it, though obviously inventory and skills, stuff like that is only like a third of your screen, keeps time moving unless enemies continue attacking you. This is useful in itself, just the ability to pause, but more useful arguably is the fact that it can prevent you from losing valuable resources. Let's say you're in a high tier map on a really juiced waystone, you've done a breach and there's tons of loot to grab on the floor, but suddenly you've gotten surrounded before you can go back for any of the loot. You get stunned and flinched out of an animation. For most people, you'd end up just getting stun locked here and you would die. If you aren't opposed to feeling a little bit slimy, however, you can pause the game by opening the menu, return to character select. From here, then log back in. It'll put you in your hideout, the map will still be open for you to return to, and all of your loot will still be on the ground for you to pick up. You'll just get to enter again from the starting position with all of your resources reset. And yeah, it might feel a little bit weird, but I've seen people who are like the top progressed of anyone on their ascendancy, some of the best possible gear and builds in the game, get surrounded by enemies and decide to just press escape, back out to the login screen, and reset just like this. Whether you use it or not is entirely up to you, but making sure that everyone knows that it is an option instead of only a few people is what makes it fair. Next up, don't be afraid to trade for skill gems. Generally speaking, the way that the game functions, the level requirement to use a skill is lower than the level that you'll start to see its equivalent uncut skill gems start dropping. I didn't start seeing tier 19 skill gems until like tier 14 or 15 maps, but I could use them the moment that I hit level 84. That's a high level example, but this applies the entire way down progression. On every step, you are able to use higher level skill gems before they start to drop for you. And aside from literally level 20 skill gems, you can buy uncut gems of every other level for a single exalted orb most of the time. This means the moment you hit level 72, you can upgrade to level 17 skill gems on your most important skills. Level 78, you can go right into level 18 skill gems, 84 for level 19 skill gems. You get the idea. Most people don't consider this an option, but because of how the game works, it's an easy way to sort of skip ahead and gain some power for just a few exalted orbs if it's something that you haven't been doing. And a bit of a bonus tip too, I mentioned level 20 skill gems going for much higher prices. This is because most people don't even actually know how to have them drop. The answer I've heard from other players is you need to reach area level 82 on your maps, which in the map system would be a tier 16 waystone, which is achieved by using a Val orb on a tier 15 and getting a bit lucky, then using that on a map that has the irradiated modifier to raise area level by 1. Then the corrupted modifier as well to raise area level by 1 another time. That should be where the level 20 gems start plopping out, and it's a bit of a specific thing to actually start doing. After that, I want to talk about the Orb of Chance. No matter what stage of the game you're at, unless you're super early, you've probably at least seen chance shards, which if you collect 10 of them, you get a full Orb of Chance. The Orb of Chance can only be used on white items, also known as commons or normals, so ones that don't have any modifiers on them except for the implicits. Using them correctly requires at least a bit of knowledge though of what you're after, as the actual item base of the item matters a lot. For example, if you use the Orb of Chance on a heavy belt, there are two outcomes. The item gets destroyed, which is the most likely, or the item turns into Headhunter, which is highly sought after. And you may be saying, well, what about the third option? There's another unique that is a heavy belt, it is Xerfe's Genesis, right? Well, that actually only drops from the Trial Master, and Orbs of Chance cannot roll boss-specific uniques, so the only options are Destroy or Headhunter. This makes heavy belts one of the better items to throw an Orb of Chance on, because while it's not a high chance of success, the only options are it disappears and you don't have to think about it anymore, or you get a Headhunter, which is great, and that's better than most chance orbed item bases. Obviously, the item still has a high chance of being destroyed. In fact, EOD gamers ran a test Orb of Chancing a bunch of different items to see the result, like 134 of them, and the general findings are that, like Path of Exile 1, chance orb percents don't seem to be equal for each item type. The chance of success depends on the rarity of the uniques that could roll as well. That means that chance orbs aren't like locked to being a 15% success rate or something like that. It is different for each item base. As a result, I'm not necessarily recommending going out and buying a bunch of orbs of chance to do this with, just saying this is how they work, and if you have orbs of chance, you should at least try using them on valuable item bases, with my highest recommendations being a heavy belt for a chance at headhunters, gold rings for a chance at Ventor's Gamble, which has super high value if you roll high modifiers on the item, or stellar amulets for a chance at Astramentis, the attribute stacking amulet. Next up then, the sort of note of item bases, let's talk about rings. Earlier on in progression, the ring bases that you want to hunt are usually the ones that give you bonus resistances. Resistances can be hard to nail down in early progression, and having these on implicits helps a lot, but as you move into the endgame, you'll have an easier time getting larger sources of resistance without needing the implicit modifiers from rings, which opens you up to using more varied ring types too. The best ones for endgame are almost undeniably breach rings, as these can have their maximum quality applied go up to 50%. This only really matters if you are perfectly certain what stats you want on a ring, are able to get them, and group them well too, because the catalyst rewards from the breach activity that lets you apply specific quality to jewelry is extremely potent for this. An example would be something like having a breach ring with bonus maximum mana as a modifier, increased mana regeneration rate as a modifier, and then maybe something like gain mana per enemy killed, just as a bit of a bonus. All three of these are mana based modifiers, and so you can apply up to 50% quality for mana modifiers with a catalyst due to it being a breach ring specifically, and literally boost every one of these three modifiers by 50% as a result. There are other ways to use this as a concept, but the idea itself is just very strong for deep endgame. As well, outside of breach rings themselves, there's also bases like the Unset Ring, which gives you an extra skill gem slot for having it equipped, which has a lot of potential value in specific setups or builds. Moving away for a moment then into more general topics, the further into endgame you get, the more into energy shield you generally will want to lean for most people. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily apply to a pure strength ascendancy like the Titan or the Warbringer, but the deeper in you get, the more and more pretty much every other ascendancy is leaning towards energy shield as their main defense. Armour says that it gives you a damage reduction against physical damage, and it even shows you a percentage on the character screen, but in reality, Armour's effect depends on the size of the incoming hit. The larger the hit that connects with you, the less effect your armor will have, meaning Armour is great at negating frequent small hits like general mobs just attacking you and mapping, but terrible at stopping the things that give us all nightmares, the one-shot effects. It does barely anything at all to help you with those, even if they are physical damage. Then we have Evasion, and Evasion similarly is not very clear. On your stat screen you may have something like 85% evasion, but that doesn't mean you have an 85% chance of evading every attack. Instead, it's actually far more complex, but generally every enemy will eventually hit you. It's just how the game works. The simple way of explaining it is that every enemy has an accuracy rating, and each time they try to hit you, that rolls against your evasion rating. Every time you successfully evade, their chances of hitting you actually go up, until it is eventually just about guaranteed. As well, high-level enemies will have higher accuracy, and higher rarity enemies will have higher accuracy too, meaning you can dodge way more consistently against like a common or magic enemy on a map than like a full-on pinnacle boss, which will not treat your evasion the same way by any means. So in a way, like Armour, evasion is great for little guys, and much less good the higher difficulty content you want to walk into. Energy shield does not have that problem at all. It's super straightforward, super easy to stack, and the number you see is the number you get. So the further into endgame you get, the more and more pretty much every ascendancy will actually want to move towards energy shield as a main defense, as it doesn't get its effectiveness lowered by how strong enemies are, aside from them just literally hitting harder. And there's a lot of ways to stack energy shield in ways that are much more potent than stacking the other two as well. Though of course, I would also see what someone who plays your specific ascendancy says on the matter as well, rather than just taking my general advice here as law. It's just something I want you to keep in the back of your mind and actually think about. Next up then, I want to talk about a general charm setup to have, because charms go extremely underused within the player base. If you aren't struggling with the content you are doing, you almost undoubtedly should have a gold charm equipped. Gold charms give you increased item rarity when you kill a rare enemy, which is exactly when item rarity matters the most. It's not a massive bonus, but it's basically free if you aren't in need of your charm for other purposes. The other two main options for in-game charms though that are heavily used are either the stone charms, which make you immune to stun after you get stunned, helping protect you from deaths that are caused by pure stunlock, which do happen pretty frequently, or the thawing charm, which makes you immune to being frozen after you get frozen. And freeze is one of the other most common methods of death for deep endgame players, so remembering those options exist if you find yourself struggling with either being stunned or frozen, and then obviously the golden charm exists if you are having no problems at all. This can really help you out long term. On one final similar note, there has been more and more talk recently in the community about the rarity of items found modifier and stacking that value as high as physically possible, and I wanted to both correct something that I've said previously about it and give a bit of a further tip. The first time I talked about item rarity as a stat in one of these videos, I said to shoot for at least 85% or so, as that's when it seems to start hitting diminishing returns. Some people apparently took that to mean that you shouldn't get item rarity past 85%, but that wasn't at all what was intended. Instead, what I was trying to say is get as much as you can because it's strong as hell, but that first 85% is the most important breakpoint to hit for earlier game players. It's the most bang for your buck, so to say. The further tip then is that most people are focused way too hard on specifically this method of increasing item rarity, pumping it into their veins while putting it on their equipment, while still just doing like tier 6 or 7 maps, and that's honestly a pretty big waste. The modifier itself is an increase to item rarity, but the biggest thing that decides item rarity as a base is the monster level and rarity of the monsters. So if you want to make proper use of the item rarity modifier that you've been fighting to get on your gear, you want to fight the highest level monsters possible and the highest rarity too, which means you want to push for tier 15 waystones for the ability to turn them into tier 16 waystones with val orbs, and then use them on irradiated and corrupted map tiles for bonus area levels as well. If you can do all of these things together without dying, then that's where the item rarity stat really starts to kick off and go nuts, not just by itself in a vacuum doing lower tier content. That just about does it for today, then everyone. A short discussion about a number of tips and tricks that I've learned while progressing the endgame in Path of Exile 2 that I thought might be able to help people out a little bit, and of course the solutions to some of the mistakes that I've even made myself earlier on. Hopefully this video helps you out, and if you have any more tips for other players, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.